Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zones. This is Robert Schoenberger, Editor-in-Chief of Industry Week, and welcome to Production Pulse, our biweekly live stream series where we discuss important issues facing the manufacturing world. Today we're going to be discussing microgrids, and to discuss that with me, we have Jana Gerber from Schneider Electric, who is head of their North American microgrid business. Rod Walton, who is managing editor of Microgrid Knowledge, one of our partner publications here at Endeavor Business Media. And we have Dave Paganie. Sorry, Dave, I know I just mispronounced that, but he is the head of the content for the Microgrid Knowledge Conference, which is happening a little later this year. So welcome all, and welcome to Production Pulse.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
So for those of us who aren't aware of what microgrids are, or not all as well versed in them as others, including me here, can we start by just defining some terms? Jana, if you could start, what is a microgrid? How do you define a microgrid versus something like cogeneration or some of the other things that manufacturers have been doing for years?
Yeah, so I often like to use the Department of Energy definition on this one, and a microgrid is a local electrical distribution network with distributed energy resources. And so those distributed energy resources could be anything from solar, landfill gas, fuel cells, any other type of generating asset that's primarily using or leveraging those renewable elements. It also has some sort of generation, storage, and then those flexible loads that are interconnected and coordinated from both the generation and the supply side as well as the load side. So a microgrid really provides a decentralized, digitized, and decarbonized alternative to some of the other elements out there. Yeah, so I think that, if I actually recently put a microgrid in my home, so I have, solar on my roof, a battery in my garage, and then that intelligent management system to know when the grid is up and when the grid is down. And then I can leverage that, the solar when the sun's shining and the battery when the sun's not available. So kind of simplify what a microgrid is in context.
Yeah, we've seen in manufacturing for years the idea of cogeneration, where some, especially larger facilities, will put in their own, either natural gas or solar or wind or some other energy asset. One of our best plants winners last year here in the Chicago area, the plastics injection molding facility, has a very large natural gas generation facility on site, and they work with their utilities. So they will sometimes, flex power to the grid when when that South Elgin, Illinois area needs more power. Is that the sort of thing we're talking about? Is microgrid just a newer way of thinking about some of these things that manufacturers have been doing for a while?
Yeah, I mean, it really is a behind the meter power plant that's virtualized. And to your point, it can operate grid tied in conjunction with the grid to help to provide that energy cost savings and renewable energy sources. But it can also really operate without the grid as well. So when the grid is down, provide that resiliency through those renewable generation assets.
And Rod, you've been writing about microgrids for a little while now. How do you define them beyond what Jana has described here when it comes to the technical definitions? What are some of the aspects that you consider important to a microgrid?
So I think with microgrids, it's a term that's very definite now, where, like she said, it's close to the load resources. They're sort of connected by a controller, a management system that balances it out. As you know, electricity is not like a fuel like gasoline, where you can just pump it into a tank and leave it there until you need it. It's got to move at a certain frequency. It's got to operate, at a certain voltage, depending on the equipment you're using. So it's a pretty well regulated, distributed energy resource that might include several resources. These can be, generators, gensets, whether they're diesel or natural gas. They can be solar. They can be battery storage, and I think that definition is going to broaden over time as we look at things like, cogeneration from landfill gas and maybe even geothermal down the road as it scales up. So, but right now I would say close to the load, mission critical, where you gotta have a backup plan, but it's more than backup. It's actually a source that can be used as essentially baseload power.
So what sort of interest are you seeing in kind of the industrial manufacturing space to add these sorts of grids to facilities? Is this only happening like in greenfields, or are you seeing people going into existing plants and installing these microgrids? What are the trends that you're seeing in the market?
I think you're going to see it in several, and I'll sort of I'm gonna blend the commercial and industrial sectors into this, because you're going to have industries which kind of bleed over to both. One obviously I think is manufacturing. As you look at a grid now that the American Society of Civil Engineers have been telling us for years is in desperate need of upgrading. And you're going to see with the data centers coming online in the next few years, and the reshoring of manufacturing, that we have a utility grid where the utility planners 5 years ago were saying we're going to have flat load growth, so we don't really need to prepare for a whole lot of extra generation on any wide scale. Oh, that's all changed now. AI's happened. Cloud-based and hyperscaling data centers are happening. So I think you're going to see more of that. You're also with the grid being in the situation it is. You've got the industrial customers, manufacturers, and I'll broaden this to like food processors, cold storage and Jana can speak to pharmaceuticals better than I can, but they're saying, downtime outages are not an option. We have to have reliable, flexible load or power to our load. And so you're seeing more and more investment in that.
So Jen, your take on this, what sort of interest are you seeing from the market, especially in that industrial space?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that many of the microgrids we've seen in the market to date have been in brownfield existing sites. So going in and creating a microgrid with the assets or adding additional assets. And so, Rod mentioned it earlier when we were prepping, and I use it quite a bit. If you've seen one microgrid, most of the time you've seen one microgrid. So a lot of them are very specific to the application and the existing infrastructure. We are seeing more on the greenfield side of the equation, and so customers knowing that they're going to be bringing in some of these distributed energy assets, that they need that additional value of the microgrid. And so they're starting to plan for those in the actual construction and building that into the design of their electrical systems early on. So I think for customers, it also adds a lot of it limits their downtime when they're actually up and then actually bringing in some of these additional distributed energy resources. It allows for less downtime and less kind of on-site seen one microgrid kind of learnings as they go. So I think so we're seeing more on the greenfield side. And I would just add a little bit on the stacked value proposition. I mean, I think we see as customers are looking at resiliency. If they're only looking at resiliency, the number one place and what most elements people would recommend is a diesel generator or some sort of natural gas generator. But if you're also looking for renewables and you're also looking for that resiliency, that's really when the microgrid comes in. I kind of relate it back to the cell phone versus the iPhone. And, if you just wanted to take a call, you just needed your phone, but you didn't know what all you had if you could bring all those parts and pieces together. So we're seeing more and more of customers realizing that it's not just one or the other of these, that it's really that stacked value proposition that they can achieve through microgrids.
Yeah, I would agree. I think what you've seen in the last 5-10 years is where there's an intersection of sustainability and resiliency goals with these companies, independent of everything else. And they've also seen, the implications of outages that have caused major disruptions and cost a lot of money. We all know that outages cost billions of dollars a year and economic impact. So they're looking at ways to mitigate that and prepare for that in the future.
Right. We've seen examples of the grid, the macro grid failing at key points. Right. I'm thinking we were before the call started. We were all talking about Winter Storm Uri, I guess about a year ago, that really just hammered Texas with ice and shut down so much generation, and people were without power for really extended periods of time during severe cold snap. We've seen other examples during the summer of when air conditioning use hits peak and we get some brownouts and things like this. In manufacturing, we're constantly hearing about people signing up for power plans where they have to agree to shut down at certain times of the day at peak loads. And so there's a lot of interest, it seems, in, like you mentioned, Jan, that continuity, making sure you don't lose production during some of those time periods. And thinking of another macro trend you mentioned, Rod, the reshoring, and we've been talking about that a lot in our industry. How is that going to, is that going to drive more, again, on that greenfield or brownfield side? I mean, let's start with you on that one. As companies start considering bringing operations back into North America, do you think that's going to be mainly going into existing facilities where we're going to be talking about a lot of microgrids being installed in existing properties, or do you think this is going to drive people to consider this from the start when they build new?
I think it's both in all those cases, right? As we bring onshoring back, there's the resiliency piece, but I do want to just mention that, the climate impact and so forth and the sustainability elements is not only being driven from a regulation perspective or from a governmental level, but really even through, as companies like Schneider Electric think about our supply chain, we are asking our suppliers to be more sustainable as well. So you're going to have these scope 3 impacts into that supply chain as we continue to bring more onshoring as well. So I think that's a really important point on what's going to continue to drive this microgrids and on-site resiliency. And I would just add here that even, Schneider Electric, we are, first off, I do want to give one quick plug. We were just named yesterday as the most sustainable company in the world by Corporate Knights for the second time, first company to be named twice. So we do really value the sustainability elements of these pieces, and we're looking to bring this into our own plants. And so we recently announced our North Haven, Connecticut site, where we are working with a partner, Green Structure, to actually microgrid up our existing facility as well. And we're having conversations with other sites across the US. And for us, even, it's the ROI of the energy piece, but it's also, we're seeing more and more outages at our plants and the impacts, like Rod was saying, on really that cost and the impact to the business that it has as we go. So drinking our own champagne.
Congratulations, by the way. That's a great honor.
Yeah, that's great.
So, Rod, let's talk about some of the drivers here. We've talked about reshoring. We've talked about, say, the lack of stable generation when it comes to the demand right now with AI, with data centers, things like this, driving a lot of demand to the main grid. What are some of the other drivers that are encouraging people to consider microgrids? I mean, is it all about sustainability? Is it all about reliability? Is it a little bit of all the above? What are you seeing?
I think it's all of the above. I mean, I'll use an example. There's a new company, and I believe it is a brownfield space in West Virginia, titanium metals facility that is going to incorporate a large amount of renewables in their microgrid project. I think you're seeing it with, this is not necessarily a manufacturer, but you're seeing it with airports, which are saying, we need microgrids on site. Pittsburgh International did a really interesting project where they incorporated gas gensets and solar into their microgrid. And of course, Jana well knows because Alpha Structure, I believe, is involved in it. The JFK microgrid project for the Terminal 1 renovation or reinvention that's happening there in New York. I think it's all of those factors. It's a complicated thing because, the grid is a 20th century machine that is a lot of incredible work, a lot of incredible people work on, but it's now trying to do 21st century things. And I think there's a reevaluation. And well, if you reinvent or rebuild the grid, how do you do it? Do you do it the same old way? Well, no, you don't. And you look at data centers, the forecast could be for as many as 50 gigawatts of new data center capacity coming online just over the end of this decade into 2030, 2032. 50 gigawatts is like 50 nuclear power plants. you're going to have to redesign how you get it there. Can you build generation closer to the load? Can you dedicate it? Which essentially you're talking about large microgrids in that respect. But the change is happening, and it's really an onus on the energy industry to meet that. You don't want those data centers going anywhere else. You want those airports to not have to deal with scheduling problems from outages. Hospitals obviously don't want to have to reschedule procedures. So these are things that are just going to become more and more mission critical, and building out at the edge of the grid or even behind the meter, as Jana said, is really one of the main solutions, I think.
One of the things I wanted to add too, if I could, and Jan and Rod, you would know this way better than I do, but it seems to me in my short period of time with the Microgrid Knowledge Conference is that there's clusters of communities in remote geographic locations that seem to be adopting microgrids. These clusters of residential communities, and Robert, this is outside the realm of manufacturing, of course, but I'm noticing in some of these areas that they don't have they don't have good access to power, that they're looking at microgrids to bring the source to these communities. So I've noticed that in my short time.
I just wonder that there's so many technologies that were developed for one purpose, but have these leapfrogging effects. I think of telecommunications. I remember touring Mexico in the mid 80s, and it was really hard to connect to people in various ways because there wasn't a lot of physical infrastructure around that country. And then when I went back in the 90s and cell phones were getting really popular and they were very cheap down there, everyone had a phone. And it was a matter of they were able to go straight from very poor communications to the cellular communications, which were significantly cheaper to install than digging trenches and laying cables across the entire country. I wonder if the same sort of thing could be happening in rural parts of the United States or rural parts of Canada, rural parts of Mexico, areas that don't have great electricity generation capabilities now or don't have great connections to a grid. If these microgrid technologies might end up serving that same sort of purpose, kind of leapfrogging people and giving access to certain modern power structures to areas that don't have them right now.
Yeah, I was going to jump in after what Rob and David both said, is that we typically talk about the value propositions of microgrids around resiliency, renewable sustainability elements, and then energy cost. And what we're seeing a lot more is this time to power or power availability discussion. And so even, whether it's a site where we work with a county outside of DC, they leverage microgrids and energy as a service very much as a emergency management, but they also had a challenge where they got a lot of new electric buses and they needed power fast, and the buses were coming and they needed to charge them. And so that availability of how fast can you get power to that site that's maybe a little bit more agile than the utilities in those areas, and then help to create that capacity. And like Rod said, having those kind of edge microgrids or edge power availability is very powerful as well.
We're drawing a little short on time here, but Jana, just before we turn things over to Dave to talk a little bit about the conference, could you tell me a little, maybe share one or two stories about a grid that you've seen recently in that manufacturing industrial space that you thought was really interesting, or a novel approach to solving a problem with a microgrid?
Yeah, I would point to our Grupo Bimbo experience with green structure. And, we work with Grupo Bimbo very closely through our sustainability business, helping them with their renewable and sustainability goals. And they were really kind of looking for something more, no longer just offsite solutions or, renewable energy credits, RECs. But so we were able to bring in their California sites, where they were also struggling with some of the public safety power shutdowns, microgrids to 6 of their sites out there. So helping them not only again with that the renewable element, which was the start of actually that conversation, but also that resiliency element out there in California. So I think that's a great example of a customer really leveraging it in multiple ways across multiple sites.
So for anyone on the West Coast, next time you go to the grocery store and see a loaf of bread, maybe you can think of a microgrid.
Sara Lee's, Entenmann's, all the good ones out there. So.
And in Texas as well. There's commercial
yeah.
microgrids have grown 20-fold in Texas, and so I'm queuing up David so he can talk about it.
Thank you, Rod. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so David, tell us a little bit about this conference. When is it? Where is it? What should people expect to learn at this event?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Thanks for the tee up, Rod. I appreciate that. Rod and Jana have been involved in this. It's called Microgrid Knowledge Conference. It's going to be April 15th to the 17th in Dallas, where Jana is based, and it's going to cover many of the topics that we talked about today. The value propositions, the resiliency, availability. So we have about 2 days or so, 2.5 days of conference sessions. There's going to be a couple sessions that are going to be focused on the topic of energy resiliency during major weather events and natural disasters. And being in Texas, we're very familiar, of course, with the disruptions from major weather events. So we are going to have some sessions with case studies from how microgrids helped keep power on from recent hurricanes, Helene and Beryl that happened last year. So that'll be very, very useful for the audience. We'll have some. We'll be talking microgrids from early conceptual design all the way to integration, installation, and operation. So the full life cycle of a microgrid project. We'll have some educational sessions that'll give people that aren't familiar with the market a basic, a 101, if you will. And so what we're trying to do is bring together the ecosystem of the microgrid market, all the players in the microgrid market, from the developers, the end users, the equipment suppliers, the consultants, and then we'll also have some regulators and government officials there as well to give everybody an update on where energy policy stands. And then we're going to be talking about financing as well. So we know there are some challenges there with investment. So we're going to be talking about some of the macroeconomic trends for the market, and then some of the ways to get past the investment hurdles so we can grow the market.
Great.
Yep.
And Jana, you're going to be speaking there, so I'm sure people are going to learn more about what Schneider is doing. And
yep, I am, and I'm excited to welcome the conference to Dallas, and excited to be a part of it and have it here to bring more microgrids to Texas.
Well, April is the best time to be in Texas. Anytime later, you're starting to get into those summer 6 months, but please enjoy it while you can.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone, for joining me today. This has been Production Pulse. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bye.